Hello and welcome to the Farming Week, the podcast from Agriland keeping you up to date with all the latest in Irish agriculture. I'm Charles O'Donnell and I'm joined by Aisling O'Brien and Breffney O'Brien. While the weather has remained fairly settled in the country this week, so farmers may have been out and about doing the various seasonal jobs that need to be done this time of year. However, one thing you have to be aware of is skin health. The Health and Safety Authority has begun a new inspection and awareness campaign aimed at skin cancer risks among outdoor workers during the summer months. Those who work in agriculture are cited as among the highest risk workers, so make sure you take all necessary precautions including sunscreen, protective clothing and seeking shade where you're able. And you can read more about that HSA campaign on our website and app. But to start this week, we're going to revisit the new Fuel Support Scheme, which officially opened this week. Many of the details we would have covered last week, but we got the final terms and conditions this week. So Aisling, what do we need to know here?
Yes, Charles. So as you said, it's officially been opened from Wednesday, the 6th of May, and it's going to remain open until May 27th. So we did know that there was going to be a window of 3 to 4 weeks for this scheme, which is open to both farmers and farm and forestry contractors. They will all be eligible to apply for this scheme, which is set to cover the 5-month period from March to July. Now, eligibility for support will be based on use of green diesel or marked gas oil for primary production of agricultural products on farms, including forestry, in 2025. So applicants will make a self-declaration of usage for the 12 months of last year based on statements or receipts, which we are told will be subject to risk-based checks. Now, for the majority of farmers, they must have submitted a basic income support for sustainability or BISS application in 2025 and must have been deemed to be an active farmer last year. Farmers must continue to farm in 2026 and submit a BISS application. Farmers that don't have to submit a BISS application must have been registered with the department as a producer in 2025 and continue to do so this year. Now, new entrants to farming who may not have had a 2025 application can apply once a BISS 2026 application is made and they can demonstrate that they're actively farming. Farmers who are in a farm partnership registered with the department are eligible to apply for the scheme. Applications should be made under the farm partnership number. Receipts can be in the name of the farm partnership or any of the members of the partnership. Now, a contractor then must provide agricultural or forestry services. They must be registered for VAT and be tax compliant. They have to have operated as an agri or forestry contractor last year and continue to operate as a contractor this year. If someone is primarily a farmer but also does some contracting in the winter but is not VAT registered as a contractor, the department said they can apply as a farmer and receive a payment. The department said the estimate of litres of green diesel used in 2025 should be solely for agricultural purposes and checks will be carried out to validate claims, and applicants that have only begun contracting this year can apply for the scheme, and new entrants will be asked to supply additional information regarding the type and scale of their business, and those applications will be examined on a case-by-case basis. Now, a farmer under the scheme can apply in a number of ways. An applicant who has made a BISS application either last year or this year or is registered on the department's Ag-Food portal, they can submit their claim through that system. But for an applicant who does not submit a BISS application or who is not registered on Ag-Food, they can download an application form, and that can be found on the Department of Agriculture website, and that can be emailed back to the department then. For farmers, no receipts will need to be submitted as part of the application. However, they have to be available for inspection if they are required to do so. Now, a contractor can apply for the scheme by downloading the contractor application form on the department's website, and they can return that completed form through email or post. Now, contractors will be required to submit their completed application along with receipts or an account summary from their green diesel supplier for the purchase of green diesel consumed in 2025 for farming activities. Now, the Department of Agriculture said that the total payment each applicant will receive will be calculated once all claims have been submitted. But the department has said up to this point that it is anticipated that approximately 20 cents a litre of the estimated usage of green diesel over the 5-month period will be the basis for the payment. But indeed, Charles, that figure could indeed be less because it will depend on the amount of applications that the department receives and indeed the value of those applications, because as we know, this is a scheme with a finite budget when it comes to it. The overall scheme is €100 million, but of course there is an element of that money that is being ring-fenced for the fisheries and aquaculture sector as well. So in the event that the scheme is oversubscribed, we're told a pro rata reduction will apply to all applicants under the scheme, and we're told the minimum payment under the scheme will be €100, but the maximum payment is not yet determined and it will depend on overall application levels, but that cannot exceed state aid limits. We're told that payments will issue under the scheme as soon as possible after the closing date, and a single payment will be made directly to an applicant's bank account. So look, Charles, I know that there has been concern from some farm organisations and contractors as well about how this scheme will be administered. Minister Hayden this week said this is a straightforward scheme aimed at those most impacted by the sudden increase in the cost of green diesel as a result of the conflict in the Middle East. And look, we'll see how it all pans out over the coming weeks. But I suppose the main thing is if you don't make an application, you don't get paid under the scheme. So the closing date, as I said, is the end of this month, May 27th. So keep that date in mind.
Moving on now, and the controversial issue of greenways has reared its head again. The state's policy on greenways came up for discussion at the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture and Food this week, and once again, the debate generated strong feelings, didn't it, Aisling?
Yeah, that's true, Charles. The issue of Greenway routes, and in particular the use or the option to use compulsory purchase orders for these projects, is a particularly emotive issue for many farmers across the country. And that was reflected in the joint committee meeting this week. I suppose the committee was looking at the use of CPOs for such projects and the impact of greenways, railways and road projects on farmers across the country. Now, representatives from the Irish Farmers Association, the Irish Natura and Hill Farmers Association and the National Greenway Action Association addressed members of the committee who heard that there should be no CPO for recreational greenways across private farmland or family homes. Here's a flavour of what was heard, starting with Paul O'Brien, who's the Infrastructure Project Team Chair at IFA.
Compulsory purchase orders and legal framework. The IFA is firmly opposed to the use of CPOs for greenway developments. Greenways are recreational amenities, not essential public infrastructure such as roads or utilities. Their delivery should be based on voluntary agreement, not compulsion.
For farmers, landowners, homeowners and rural families who are being asked to carry the permanent burden of recreational greenway policy. Let me be clear. We are not opposed to walking, cycling, tourism or community amenities. We are opposed to private farmland and family homes being targeted, pressured or threatened with CPO for recreational greenways.
The Irish Natura and Hill Farmers Association acknowledge the valuable contribution that tourism infrastructure, including greenways, make to rural Ireland. However, this development must not come at the expense of the very communities it is intended to benefit. At the core of our position is a fundamental principle. Greenways must be developed with, not imposed upon landowners and farm families.
And those were some of the contributions made to the committee. Charles, you also heard there from National Greenway Action Association Chair Cleona O'Shea and Phelim Malloy, the National President of the INHFA. Now, Cleona O'Shea stressed that for farmers, land is not spare ground. She said it's the farm business, the home place, the security for lending, the inheritance plan, the drainage system, the paddock layout, the machinery route and the livestock system. And she said when a greenway is drawn through a farm, the damage is not limited to the strip taken. She said it sometimes can split the holding, break grazing blocks, interfere with cattle movement, damage drainage, restrict machinery access, reduce privacy and increase safety risk. And she also referred to the Code of Best Practice for national and regional greenways, which she said talks about consultation, public land use, fair treatment and accommodation works. But she said that landowners are seeing routes gather momentum before proper engagement. Private farmland is being pursued before public options for land are exhausted. There's survey pressure, she claimed, and consultant pressure. And behind it all, she said, the threat of CPO. Now, Paul O'Brien from the IFA noted that approximately 60 Greenway projects are currently being worked on by county councils and consultants across the country, with a combined proposed length of around 3,000 kilometres. He said many of the proposals are creating significant uncertainty and concern amongst rural families, farmers and communities. And he said using Transport Infrastructure Ireland's estimate of €2 million per kilometre, the potential overall cost could be in the region of €6 billion. And he said this contrasts sharply with TII's current annual Greenway budget of between 60 and €65 million. And he said that this highlights the absence of a clear budget-led approach to Greenway planning and prioritisation. And he called for a more structured, budget-led framework, which he said should be considered as part of the government's review, ensuring that project ambition is aligned with realistic funding, prioritised delivery and certainty for landowners. Phelan Malloy, the president of the INHFA, said for Greenway projects to succeed in the longer term, they have to be built on meaningful collaboration and mutual benefit. He said where routes cross private land, farmers must be recognised as equal partners in the concept, the design and the ongoing management of these Greenway projects. He said this partnership model ensures that Greenways contribute not only to the wider tourism economy, but also to the sustainability and viability of farm enterprises. And he said that consultation must begin at the earliest conceptual stage of any proposed Greenway and not after routes have been selected or funding has been allocated. Now, while the benefits of Greenways were acknowledged during the committee meeting, Charles, some members were shocked at the proposed costs or the estimated costs that Paul O'Brien had outlined to the committee. And others then spoke passionately about the impact, the negative impact of CPO or the threat of CPO on farmers. So look, it's definitely a topic that's set to run, but a very interesting debate on Greenways and the use of CPO to achieve them this week at the Agriculture Committee.
Now, moving on to talk about prices, we're going to bring in Breffney O'Brien from Agriland's technical team for an update on where things stand on beef prices at the moment. And as well as that, Breffney, you also have the latest on cattle exports.
Yeah, Charles, so I suppose this week's factory quote sees base price offers for prime cattle. You know, they're opening at approximately 90 cents per kilo below this time last year. Now, we all know that last year, 2025, was an exceptional year for beef price, but still, you know, it's pretty sobering when you see that, you know, that 90 cent, your opening prices are 90 cent a kilo below this time last year. So the first full week of May last year, that saw bullock or steer base prices at approximately $7.50 per kilo. You know, this week we've seen most outlets are quoting, you know, somewhere in the region of $6.60 per kilo on the grid for steers. That's approximately 90 cent per kilo below this time last year. So looking at a 400 kg carcass weight steer, you know, that's a base price difference of approximately €360 a head. So, you know, when you're killing or in the business of producing certain big numbers of these types of cattle, you can see how that really stacks up. I suppose looking at prices this week, yeah, heifers are generally being quoted at $6.70 per kilo on the grid, steers generally at around $6.60. A little bit more going in cases. Fleshed P-grade cows been quoted at $6.10 a kilo, flat price. O-grade cows approximately $6.20, $6.30 going for them better type O plus grading cows in cases. O-grade cows $6.40 to $6.50, and U-grade cows been quoted at $6.60. Again, you know, there is scope. Some farmers are managing to secure slightly more there for cows. Under 24-month bulls have been quoted $6.90 per kilo for U-grades. 680 quotes less common for these this week, and they were going about a bit more there last week. The O-grade bulls have been quoted at 680 in general, O-grade bulls 660 and P-grade bulls 650 approximately. Again, and the under 16-month bull 660 to 670 per kilo on the grid. And I suppose just another little side note there on looking at the overall cattle exports this year. So we've had over 110,000 calves being exported from Ireland the first 16 weeks of 2026. That's according to the latest figures from the Department of Agriculture. So obviously calves are the largest volume of Irish cattle exports, as is always the case to date this this year. Looking at total cattle exports, that's at 144,000, just over 144,000 head of cattle. There's over 12,000 weanlings, 8,000 stores and almost 13,000 adult cattle. Total cattle exports to date this year are down 20%, Charles. That's driven by a 15% decline in calf exports, 30% decline in weanling exports, and 28% decline in stores, and 35% decline in adult cattle exports. So I suppose, look, the outbreak of blue tongue earlier this year was a little bit of a setback, and trading relations with European countries had to be maybe re-examined, as a result of that. We are now back with health certs in most markets. Of course, Ireland do remain locked out of Poland for calf access to calves. There was a fairly big market there last year. There hasn't been any calves gone out to it this year, to my knowledge anyways. So, numbers got off to a slow start, export numbers. They have picked up, but they are still running 20% behind last year, Charles.
And while we have you, Breffney, what's the latest on prices for sheep farmers?
Yeah, so I suppose we did see in the lead up to Easter, did see a big jump in our spring lamb quotes came available, and of course the hogget prices as well. So that's, I suppose, fairly positive now. They did peak there probably about 2-3 weeks ago, and they have eased back slightly there now this week. So we've seen price cuts to hoggets and spring lambs. They have set into the trade there this week. But despite that, cull prices, Charles, they do remain largely firm this week. So last Monday, that was the 27th of April, there was some talk from lamb procurement or factory sheep procurement managers of hogget prices falling for the second half of last week, and that price drop did set into the trade earlier this week and remains in place there. At least one of the outlets did reduce its cull price offer, but despite this, other outlets held cull prices, and at least one outlet has increased its cull price since early last week. Some of the higher spring lamb price offers from last week did reduce that a little bit as well for this week, and some of the lower offers from last week held then for this week. So just putting some numbers on it, Charles. Cull have been quoted at 540 to 550 per kilo this week. Your quality assured hoggets are 940 to 950 up to 23 kilos carcass weight, and then your spring lambs are at €10 to 10.10 per kilo up to 21 kilos carcass weight. That price over the €10 for the spring lambs, it is fairly positive, and hopefully it can stay in a good position as more and more farmers will have their spring lambs ready for factory fit in the coming weeks ahead and months as well, Charles.
Thanks for that, Breffney. And just while we're on sheep, there was some good news this week for the sector, with Ulster Wool confirming that the returns for its farmer members for 2025 are set to hit their highest level in 10 years. The organisation said that average returns per kilogram are 70% higher than last year, with prices increasing across all wool types. So that's good news for a product that has struggled with low prices in recent years. But moving on now. And there have been repeated calls to be fair, for a voluntary milk reduction scheme to be introduced in the EU to control milk supply and to try and correct prices. However, if Minister Martin Hayden is to be believed, such a scheme doesn't seem to be on the table at the moment, Aisling.
Yeah, that's true, Charles, because Minister Hayden, in response to a parliamentary question from Fianna Fáil TD Michael Cahill, has confirmed that no formal proposal for an EU voluntary milk reduction scheme has been tabled by the European Commission to date. He did say that he and many of his European counterparts have highlighted concerns about the future dairy market situation at the EU Agri Fish Council meetings. He said, though, that any proposed supply reduction scheme would be carefully considered in the context of the current market conditions across all member states and budget availability under CAP to ensure the most effective response for Irish dairy farmers who, of course, are coming into peak milk production season. He said that his department is continuing to be in close contact with the Commission and with other member states, as well as dairy farming representatives regarding developments in the markets. And he said they will continue to engage constructively on this issue. As you said, there has been multiple calls for such a scheme to be introduced. The European Milk Board really leading the charge on this in recent weeks. They've warned that record milk volumes are driving Europe towards the next price collapse. And they have repeatedly asked for this voluntary voluntary volume reduction scheme where producers would be paid to reduce their milk output temporarily for a defined period. And the call has been supported by the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, which has urged Minister Hayden to support this reduction scheme. ICMSA President Denis Drennan said at least 7 EU member states have expressed support for such a scheme, and he warned that dairy farmers all over the state are now being wiped out by a fatal combination of below cost of production milk price, surging inputs, principally from fuel and fertiliser as well. And staying with dairy news, Charles, Ornua this week confirmed an increase in its April purchase price index, the PPI. So when Ornua's estimated member co-op processing costs of 9.5 cent a litre are taken into account, the PPI implies an indicative return of 35.5 cent a litre. That's inclusive of VAT at 4.5%, for milk at 3.6% fat and 3.3% protein. And this indicative return is up 1.3 cent a litre from the previous month, and Ornua said the result reflected a pickup in market returns for the month of April. Positive news also this week for the Global Dairy Trade Index, which has moved up after the latest GDT trading event this week, and that followed, of course, 2 consecutive decreases. The index moved up 1.5% following Tuesday's auction. And finally, some news from the Central Statistics Office, which has reported that domestic milk intake was estimated at 1.33 billion litres in the first quarter of this year. This represents an increase of 20.4 million litres or 1.6% when compared with the same period last year.
Now, moving on, we have further updates for you on farm schemes, including, Aisling, an interesting stat related to ranking and selection under the Targeted Agricultural Modernisation Scheme. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, Charles. So over 63,000 applications have been received across the first 11 tranches of TAMS 3. And that's around 3 times the average number of applications received over the same period under the previous scheme, TAMS 2. So as a result of this and the potential impact on the remaining budget for TAMS 3, Minister Martin Hayden previously announced that he would be putting in place a ranking and selection process to tranches 9 and 10 of the scheme. Now, all eligible applications submitted in the first 8 tranches of the scheme received 100% approval. And in response to a recent parliamentary question, Minister Hayden said that TAMS 3 has proved to be extremely attractive, with payments of over €152 million issued to farmers since payments began in June of 2024. Now, the data presented by the Minister shows that around 71% of the total applications received since the scheme began have been approved. But the Minister did confirm that some 2,215 applications have been refused this year by the Department of Agriculture following the ranking and selection process. And the Minister noted that the data does not include applications that were withdrawn or rejected prior to ranking and selection, and those currently being assessed as well. Now, Deputy Michael Cahill, who did pose this parliamentary question, also asked the Minister to simplify TAMS as a matter of priority, and he claimed that a significant number of applications were being turned down due to the scheme being too onerous and complicated. But Minister Hayden said that a total of only 6% of applications have been rejected due to ineligibility under terms and conditions of the scheme, which also includes cases where the applicants voluntarily decided to withdraw their applications. And he said he was satisfied that the scheme in its current format is the best mechanism for ensuring that funding is targeted at the most appropriate enterprises. And he said he would ensure that the scheme continues to be reviewed, taking into consideration the available budget and the number of applications received. And just before we leave scheme updates, Charles, for this week, listeners to the podcast will be unsurprised to hear that I'm about to talk about BISS because a total of 92,701 applications for this year's BISS and other area-based schemes were submitted to the department as of Tuesday this week. That means that nearly 15,000 additional applications have been submitted to the department since April 27th. Now, the closing date for BISS applications, it's now just over a week away, midnight on Friday, May 15th. And this is also the deadline for the submission of applications for a range of other schemes and transfers of entitlements as well. And all applications have to be be submitted online through the department's Ag Food portal. And if you're looking for any help on your BISS application or maybe any of the other scheme applications or entitlements, you can ring the department's direct payments help desk. You can find that number on Agriland, and those phone lines are going to be open for extended hours in the run up to the application deadline, as is the department's office in Portlaoise, where farmers can drop in person as well if they need some help from department staff with applications.
Now, our next item is one you might want to mark down in your diary for about a year and a half from now. There was some good news this week for farmers who are also fans of golf, Aisling.
That's true, Charles, because we haven't even had this year's National Ploughing Championships, and we're fast forwarding to 2027 because we got confirmation this week that the National Ploughing Championships are set to be moved back by 1 week in 2027 in order to prevent a clash with a little thing called the Ryder Cup. Now, the National Ploughing Association has been planning ahead for 2027 for quite some time due to that pretty prestigious golf tournament. And as we all know, the National Ploughing Championships, it's one of the biggest outdoor events in Europe, and it traditionally takes place around the third week in September. But it was very recently confirmed that Adair Manor in County Limerick is going to host the Ryder Cup, which of course features teams from Europe and the US, for any people who don't know what the Ryder Cup is. It's going to happen from September 13th to 19th in 2027, and it's going to be the 100th staging of the Ryder Cup, which it's expected to attract crowds of over 250,000 people across the week, Charles. So it is really a hugely popular event. And I suppose given that the Ploughing Championships also attracts a similar crowd of definitely well over 200,000 in recent years as well, it just shows, I suppose, the fact that we don't want both of those events clashing. I suppose just even basically for resources, if you have somebody in the house who loves golf and loves ploughing at the same time as well. But they have come up with a solution. Anna Marie McHugh, the Assistant Managing Director of the National Ploughing Association, told me this week that the NPA has held a number of meetings with representatives from the Ryder Cup over the past 2 years. And as a result of those meetings, they have moved their dates now by 1 week following the announcement of the dates of the Ryder Cup. So it means that the 2027 National Ploughing Championships will take place on the 21st, 22nd and 23rd of September. So if you have your diary for 2027 already, you can mark all those into your calendar for next year. But no venue has yet been confirmed for the 2027 National Ploughing Championships. We're told that the NPA is working through the final aspects of the venue. And Anna Marie McHugh did tell us that there is very little movement potential for the ploughing due to the timing of the harvest. They can't bring the ploughing forward, and due to the risk of seasonal storms and the necessity for farmers to prepare ground for winter crops, they can't put the event back more than a week. So there won't be a clash, but there will be a big demand on services because the ploughing is going to start just 24 hours after the Ryder Cup. So it's going to be a very busy week or two in Ireland in September 2027, that's for sure. And look, just to bring us back to this year's championships, of course, they are taking place in Screggan in Tullamore again this year from the 15th to the 17th of September. So we're all looking forward to that. So hopefully Europe will bring home the goods again as they did last year, Charles, and maybe Shane Lowry will have that golden moment again in Adair, who knows?
Well, the ploughing is the standout event of the Agri calendar every year, but the Tullamore show wouldn't be too far behind, and that show was also generating news this week. Details of the 2026 Tullamore show and FBD National Livestock Show were announced this week, including the date. This year's show will take place on August 9th, so again, one to jot down for the diary. And speaking of FBD, the search is officially underway for the 28th FBD Young Farmer of the Year. Applications and nominations for this year's awards are due to open today. That's Thursday, May 7th. But moving on to our final item today, dairy processor and co-op Tirlán recently handed out an award that you may not have heard of before. Many dairy co-ops have awards for farmers and suppliers, but this is an award for the people who keep the whole show on the road, literally. Aisling, can you tell us more?
Yeah, so as part of Tirlán's recent Dairy and Sustainability Awards, Mike Ryan of William Byrne Transport was selected as the winner of the 2026 Tirlán Milk Driver Recognition Award. So the co-op said this award celebrates the role that milk drivers play in supporting farm families and ensuring the flow of milk from the farm to the processing plant. And the response from suppliers was overwhelming, according to Tirlán, with more than 85 drivers nominated by farmers across the co-op's catchment. Now, Mike Ryan was recognised for his long-standing commitment to farmers on his County Tipperary collection round. He's been working with William Byrne Transport since 2008, delivering milk to Tirlán's Ballyraggart plant. He has built up a reputation for consistency and pride in his work, and he's actually followed in his father's footsteps, Charles, because his father was himself a milk haulier as well. So Tirlán said that in nearly 2 decades on the road, Mike has taken just one sick day, which the co-op said is a testament to his dedication and his reliability. And the farmers who nominated Mike described him as a gentleman, as helpful, respectable and easygoing. And several farmers noted Mike's punctuality, with one supplier saying that you could set your watch by him. John Murphy, the chair of Tirlán, said the nominations for the award, I suppose, reflected a shared appreciation for drivers who go above and beyond what's expected. Several nominations referred to drivers checking in during particularly difficult periods or maintaining steady collections when conditions were challenging. Others spoke about drivers getting stuck in the snow and on frozen yards during harsh winters to ensure collections continued as normal. And in one case, a driver helped to highlight the need for a lane upgrade, supporting ongoing access to a farm and its long-term viability. So well done to Mike and to all of the milk drivers out there who I hope are listening to us while they're doing their milk collection runs across the country. And well done to you all keeping the show on the road, as Charles said.
Well, that pretty much brings us to the end of the show. Just before we go, there's one very interesting story we want to draw your attention to. Agriland dairy specialist Cathal O'Shea was recently in Macroom to visit the Lynch family, who have a fairly unique operation. The farm operation is home to over 700 water buffalo across 5 platforms, 2 of which are milking blocks. The farm also has its own on-site cheese factory, the main product of which is mozzarella. Here's a clip of Kieran Lynch of Macroom Buffalo Cheese talking about the operation.
Producing a lot less milk than a regular cow, less than half. The lactation will be roughly 2,700 litres over a 13-month calving interval. Much lower volumes, but what we gain there is the solids. So we'd be getting about 7.5% fat and 4% protein. So it's very good then for making cheese like mozzarella.
That was Kieran Lynch speaking there. And do please check out that story on our website and app, because if you're looking for a good read, you won't be disappointed. But that's where we'll leave it for now. Please don't forget to rate, review and follow The Farming Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love if you could spare some time to give us 5 stars and share The Farming Week with anyone you think might be interested. From Aisling, Breffley and myself, take care.